welcome to Other Lands Editing Podcast, where two speculative fiction writers and editors help you craft fantastical worlds by keeping an eye on exacting editing and foundational writing principles. Every 2 weeks, we bring you interviews with other writers, advice on editing and writers' craft pitfalls, and reviews of popular media to help you grow. So sit back, relax, and join Margaret Bates and Midnight Voss as we discuss all things writing and editing. Hi, welcome to the Other Lands Editing Podcast. Today, Midnight and I have a guest, a friend of ours, Gemini Frost, who has written a lot of male fiction and sometimes Omegaverse. And so she's well versed in also aspects of queer fic that we don't always write because we're sometimes more sapphic. And today we'll be talking about fan fiction and what you can learn about it. And honestly, the impetus for this was that I've had three big publishing events this year where you've had Rose in Chains by Julie Soto, The Irresistible Urge to Fall for Your Enemy by Bridget Knightley, and then most recently Alchemized by Sin Lin Yu, which are all fics that's now they're original novels and they're doing very well, but they all started as fanfics from the Harry Potter universe, specifically Dramione, which is Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger in like an alternative. I mean, they never actually got together anywhere close in the book, so obviously its own fanfic universe. But that's where we're starting with. And greetings, ladies. How y'all doing?
Fine, thanks.
Right.
Cool. Well, I guess the thing I wanted to add when we talked about Alchemized, which I've watched a couple of YouTube videos, I'm going to confess it's 1,000 pages. So I didn't have time to read it. And it's also material that I don't prefer to read. Everybody has their own yum. I just am not someone who, as a person, can read a lot of dubcon and non-con. So it has a lot of consent or lack thereof consent issues in it. And so I skip out on it, but just as a warning, and I'll put trigger warnings in the notes too. But Alchemized deals with this hybrid of Harry Potter, but also a Handmaid's Tale. So there's a lot of sexualized violence and dubious consent and forcing sex and all sorts of stuff. So it's very dark. It's a very dark romance set up. So that's where that came from, with a obviously a very dark fanfic origin. So
That's where our conversation really started of the concept that alchemize is two things, two individual properties put in a blender with a new magic system, and how mixing those ideas is usually what you would start with when you're trying to make fanfic a little more original, is that you're probably not going to say, I'm going to copy this fanfic and just change the names, because a little while ago you would gotten sued for that. But like, even if you look back at 50 Shades of Grey, it was these two characters, and then they just removed the whole supernatural element, which changes a lot of things. You change the world, you change a lot of things that go along with it.
Yes.
yeah. And I will say with 50 Shades of Grey, when it changed to being essentially an all human AU, obviously the plot changes because there's no vampires in it. I think what doesn't change as well in that one, because I feel like it definitely didn't, as we like to call it, file the serial numbers enough. But I feel like when they pulled to publish it, they just wanted the money, so they didn't care about changing too much. But the Control F approach, really, the backbones, the characterization of the characters is still there. You can still tell that Jose is supposed to be Jacob, the ambiguous other love interest, and you can map all of Christian's siblings easily onto who was which of Edward's siblings in the book. So it still has the pitfalls of maybe the characters are too much, outside of if they're supernatural or something, too much personality and appearance wise, like their source material. But with Alchemized, you're right, because, well, it's not going to be exactly Harry Potter. It's not going to be exactly a Handmaid's Tale because it's mixing a lot of things together. And then I think you said that they were able to develop a different type of magic system for this, or some of the videos said they worked on a very different type of magic ideas than the ones you see in Harry Potter on top of that.
You would really have to, because the magic system in Harry Potter is not just a soft magic system, it's sort of chaotically developed one book to the next. So it would be outside of fan fiction, it would be hard to have something that other people would buy into because there's no rules. You can use words sometimes of like potions sometimes. Rebuilding the magic system would be really important if you were going to borrow in that way.
Yeah, you need something more coherent. I did see in at least one review that was very critical of it, because again, YouTube's a great tutor, but that they felt that some of the elements of it drawing from alchemy took shorthand notes or sort of cribbed ideas a lot from Full Metal Alchemist. So its magic system works similarly to that. So I guess it's almost like
That's
a triple
odd.
fusion. Yeah, because they're like some of the things that are in it aren't like traditional alchemy. They're more following the way that it was set up in FMA.
Sure.
So I guess it's kind of three things at once. We'll get to the ethics of like how does that work with, are you only popular because you sort of got a niche in the fandom? Fans of X property are now fans of you by extension. But I guess first we want to talk about like we're all have either been fanfic for writers or are sometimes poke at it. So, you know, what exactly makes up doing fanfic and what are advantages of doing it? What are things that you guys have learned over the years doing it? That sounds like I keep saying like doing it like bow chicka wow wow, but writing fanfic.
Well, for one thing, I learned, and I'm Gemini, by the way, I have learned that, how to write a lot because fanfic readers are they like to read. And, if you want to keep them happy, you got to write all the time, constantly. Plus, you get feedback with every chapter, which is something you don't get in regular novel writing, and it's very nice and it keeps you going in many ways. It's harder sometimes to keep going with original fiction.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there is that aspect where it is, I don't want to use so performative, but it feels almost like if you're doing a movie is a novel, then fanfic is like theater because there is
Mhm.
that reciprocal communal aspect to it. And it is helpful to get that feedback, especially maybe if you're just starting writing or getting your feet wet, because people will, they don't always, sometimes they'll offer some constructive criticism. Sometimes people are out there and they're annoying, so they'll offer more than criticism you're ready to hear yet because you're a baby writer. But it helps you understand, like, even if you just get feedback that's generally, oh, I like this, or your dialogue's really good, it encourages you to build on skills that people sort of notice as well. So I think it's a really good way to get that nurturing feedback most of the time. I mean, outside of shipper wars or people being lame on AO3 or whatever. And I think you're right, that's very encouraging. It can be like a little dopamine hit. So it encourages you to write, and you're right, or correct in that it teaches you to write daily or pretty often to both keep that cycle of feedback going because you get excited because people are getting into it. What about your experience with it, Midnight?
Um, I mean, I'll just piggyback off of that to say that from a writing pedagogy standpoint, what you guys are talking about is really something that we struggle to give students is this really strong sense of audience that you're writing to other people and that you're creating something from your head that they're going to read and enjoy. And so when you're writing those moments where you're going to set things up to make them super happy and then rip their hearts out, you're doing those emotional things and getting that practice because you can imagine them very concretely. It's can be for some people very difficult to imagine an audience, and that's a very useful place to develop your training wheels of you just have them ready to go. They want more and more and more, as Gemini said, of they always want more from their favorite ships and things. So they're ready to go and ready to watch or read with you. The other thing that we talked about before was that development of voice and how often with fandoms, even if often with fandoms that are television or movie based, but also with the novels, you get a sense of this is a voice that exists already and I'm trying to match it, which helps you practice those skills of how would I indicate a voice on the page. And that's a skill that you really want to develop and practice.
Yeah, and I think not even just like if it's a book or even a TV show, like not just the tone of the show, but especially if the show has characters within it who have very specific dialogue patterns and way of speaking. I say this because I came originally like 20 plus years ago from Buffy fan fiction. So it's not
Hmm.
even just kind of the ugh, Joss Whedon-esque version of California speak, but each character sounds different. So if you gave a Xander line to Willow, it doesn't work, or vice versa. Or obviously Spike's not going to sound like Anya and the way he delivers dialogue, if they are both kind of negative. But it just helped because you have to learn to mimic like the tone of the show or the book or the whatever piece you're looking at. It could be a video game, but you have to also know how to mimic each character's voice. So I think it's good for teaching not just voice and understanding it, even if you don't cognitively know, you like instinctively you're kind of matching it. And it helps you develop your own style and voice as well. So I think that's a really helpful exercise because I think a lot of people don't necessarily, if they're starting out as new novelist are as conscientious about can I match style? Can I match different things? Can I notice how patterns are in like X writer or X property? And then can I at least match to that? Because I know style classes at my university, what they do is they have you read different styles and see if you can practice writing in them from like established authors and playing with their style to also grow your own voice.
Yes. And fanfic, you more, as you said, you more automatically realize that everybody doesn't speak the same. And that gives you a good basis for writing novels in which hopefully all your characters do not sound exactly identical. And you learn that from fanfic and you take it over to your original writing and you can create more differentiation in your characters and the way they speak.
And I think fanfic is good for character work. I always think of fanfic, and we'll talk about how it's structured differently from novels in a bit, but I always think of fanfic often as the interstitials. Most of the time, I've come from fandoms where I've watched a TV show, and I've, especially back in the day when they were like Buffy or like, I'm gonna be honest, Smallville, and they were airing the regular way over 9 months, weeks in between, winter and summer hiatuses. So week to week, you wanted to fill in the gaps or be like, oh, that's the trailer. What's going to happen next week? And often shows, especially looking again at you, Smallville, where the characterization is lacking or where things happen, or honestly, it feels like the plot was held together by spider webs and Swiss cheese.
Mm-hmm.
But the interstitials of what is in their heads, why are they thinking this? How do I dig deeper? Which I think is why fanfic is a home. And this is, I say this with the greatest amount of love. Some of my favorite stories really are this, but the coffee shop alternate universe, where it's just two characters from the show, maybe even they're just like transported to all human AU just talking to each other in a coffee shop. Because I think it wants you to get at those deeper levels of motivation and characterization that sometimes a bigger property or if it's a side character doesn't get the attention to get that fleshed out.
Right. And it's not just fix it fix where you take a storyline you didn't like and correct it, but sometimes it's just, as you say, things that weren't really covered in the story because of the way it's filmed. They can't always go as deeply into people's motivations as you can in fanfic. And so a lot of fanfic, I think, is trying to dig into why the characters did what they did.
I think that's one of the skills of it too, because you have the luxury of not even pages really. Mostly it's a virtual medium on like it was in the day like LiveJournal or fanfic.net. Now it's mostly AO3 archive of our own because I think Wattpad's kind of shifting how it's doing stuff or fallen some out of favor. But it's literally virtual. So you could write hundreds of thousands of words and you have to worry about it because it's never going to have to even be printed or bound. So it's like you have limitless space,
Mm-hmm.
whereas a book or a TV show or a movie only has what they can do under their budget. So it really does
Exactly.
encourage that deeper exploration. I think it makes you think more about the characters. Sometimes I would argue more than sometimes the showrunners or the original author does, depending. And they can have what we call, those really rich head canons and things that
Mm-hmm.
and fanon things that fans say this must be true because I got to fill in those holes because I'm just trying to figure out the why.
Yeah, we can also fill in with our own biases, the way characters didn't do exactly what we expected to do, and write our own view on that character, which a lot of us do in, like, say, supernatural fandom.
Yeah, totally. And you can see that. And I mean, I was a shipper writer, but I also wrote a lot of gen fics. And I know that experience she wrote, within honestly Clex. So like that's a relationship dynamic and
Mm-hmm.
other things across other fandoms. But I feel like people think, oh, it's only shippy, but I think it also gives you this chance to it brought out what if could have happened as well, because I'm a big fan of AUs. So I
Mm-hmm.
think, which is alternate universe. So I think that's really fun to be like, if this one thing had been different, or what if it was completely structurally different from the beginning, or when you get those fusions. So it allows you to play a lot with the same characters and then see how certain changes could change their outlooks, their emotions, the way they talk, the way they view things. An example that's really easy to draw out for Buffy because it created its own AU is if, the Wish verse, which is in season 3, like, what if, Cordy's wish had stayed and you had that bitter Buffy who'd gotten injured a lot in Cleveland and that was just the Buffy you're stuck with kind of thing. But
Sure.
it's really fun to play with the things and the AUs and the ideas that you don't get to see long. Like maybe it's a cool one-off on the TV show, but you don't get to delve deeper into that. Like
And
I'm sure there's
Supernatural, they had end verse. They had the episode the end, and everybody wrote, stories based on that. So in a way, it gives you your own launching off pad for AUs that are already sort of canonical.
yeah, which is really fun. So I think there's a lot of thoughtfulness in fan fiction. I think there's a lot of people really often learning the ropes, and then you can do it for years after you've already learned the ropes, but just a lot of community. I do think going back to your point, Gemini, is that when you have the different character shadings, because like I think it's also colored a little bit by either how you see the show yourself, kind of your own fan goggles, or complete confession. If you're a shipper and you have like people in your particular relationship ship that you are putting together, you're
Hmm.
gonna be kinder to that particular character or set of characters usually sometimes than shippers from the other warring side of the fence or side of the triangle or whatever. I'm gonna be really honest. In Smallville fanfic, if you're a Chlarker and you really like Chloe, it is what it is. We move past other real world events. Then how you write her is going to be different than someone who's more of a fan of Lois or someone who's more of a fan of Lana. Or theoretically, I guess someone might have been a fan of Tess because they did some interesting AU stuff in season 10 with like a completely different universe. Anyway, you just have these like shipper goggles. So you're going to write the same characters, but you're going to get to also have different takes on them than the source material or each other, which is also really
Yes.
interesting.
I'm going to say one more thing about fanfic that I don't think we mentioned, that I think it teaches you to write chapters that keep your readers reading, because I call it like Edgar Rice Burroughs writing, where every chapter ends on not exactly a cliffhanger, but something that your readers will want to continue reading. And that's really important in fanfic because, if you don't keep your readers happy, they're going to go off and read something else. So you want to end every chapter on something that really clicks with them. And this is a good thing to keep to turn into your novel writing, because that keeps people turning the pages.
Now that you mention it, a lot of times in novels, especially when I see it from clients who are newer, they'll be like, and then she went to sleep and that'll close a chapter. And now that I think back on it, a lot of fanfics, unless you're like knocked out because there was a battle or something, they don't
Hmm.
end on and then I went to sleep. But I feel like in contemporary like novels I've read, and sometimes even in fantasy ones, it's like, and then they went to sleep, and then they had breakfast, and then tomorrow they'll go do this at the, archives, but they don't have those kind of, I call them buttons, but that sort of
Hmm.
cliffy feeling. And I think, and that brings us to structure a little bit to Midnight, that because the way fan fiction is written and usually week to week or every couple days or whatever, it's also serialized. And I think, well, it's just different because a lot of novels aren't necessarily told serialized. I mean, they used to be because you could publish chapters of Great Expectations in the newspaper or whatever if you're Charles Dickens. What
Right.
is it
And Edgar
show?
Rice Burroughs, like I mentioned, he was one that was, he was serialized too. And I know he has a lot of issues and racism and everything else, but he does keep you reading. So, something like that is a good thing to work on. And like you said, you just don't want your chapter to end with a thud.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
and so I think what you're talking about of like the serialized structure, ending a chapter in a way that creates more tension is good. But if you're looking at the overall structure, it has to go somewhere more quickly than it does for fanfic because, as Gemini said, the readers want to read forever. So you can explore every rabbit hole you possibly could and then eventually get back around to tying these threads together for a conclusion. Whereas for a book, there are physical limitations of how many pages people are willing to carry around or print for you, and a sense that you need to be going somewhere with a tighter plot structure. So that's something that if you were going straight from fan fiction, you would want to spend more time thinking about.
So you
yeah,
need to tighten it up, maybe, is what you're saying.
yeah, because
Yeah.
like I mean, I didn't know this coming from fanfic originally, like years and years ago. But I had some fanfics that would be like 200,000 words. I'm like, oh, that's a novel. And people are like, no, that's not. That's three. And I think that happens with clients, especially because we'll go in places, social media and Facebook and groups that are like, oh, yeah, we're for fantasy writers. And they'll be like, yeah, my first draft's 170,000 words. And I think if they had come from, not, I mean, maybe they also are just original writing off the bat, but I think if you've come from fandoms and you're used to churning out like Russian novel-sized epics, calling myself out on that one, from your fandom, then you don't realize that, hey, it's usually depending on the genre, like romance, 80,000 words, YA, 70,000 words. Yes, fantasy can be longer, but maybe 120, 130 for a debut. 130 is
Yeah.
Yeah.
pushing it, especially because the cost of paper has gone up because of what hasn't gone up lately. So I know
Mhm.
that I've heard a lot from places that even if sometimes a contemporary romance can be 100,000 words, they're really looking for more 85, 90 because they're trying to literally save money on the binding and the paper if you're going traditional. So,
Yeah,
but if you're used to fanfic,
when I started way back in the day, they were looking for 100,000 words, but now they're definitely more like 80. And if you find yourself with like 150,000 words, it might be time to chop it in two, you know?
you got a duology. Yeah,
Yeah, or
basically.
just edit the heck out of it.
And I think the other thing about it being serialized, like again, not that it's a bad thing, 'cause people love it, it's addictive. There are other things that do that kind of model. Like I know Kindle had theirs and they've sort of moved away from that model, but I know Radish was for a while, and I know there are other places to get the serialized versions of original stories. So it did catch on from that Wattpad sort of fanfic tradition. I edit for a writer, Virginia Christian Jasper Hyde. He goes by both. And so he's doing sort of a serialized bit by bit about a version, sort of extrapolation of Dracula, which technically wouldn't be fanfic because it's out from under copyright, but it's the same
Mhm.
idea of retelling a story. But again, serialized, and that works because it's the expectation of the readers like signing on for the subscription or going to Radish or whatever. But because books themselves aren't serial, you do have weird parts if you try to just shove a fanfic and like say it's a book now. And I think that happens a lot in 50 Shades of Grey because everything feels very episodic or
Mhm.
like almost like a soap opera. Like this big thing happened and then it's fine in the chapter and then this other big thing happened and that can be a holdover from the fanfic serialization pattern.
I think that's a very good point. And when you switch something from when you decide to file the serial numbers off, you do have to do a lot of editing to make sure you fill in the empty spaces that the reader is filling in their head from the original source material.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good point because I think the two biggest skills I think atrophy or don't get as developed with fanfic is that you don't do, unless you're like super AU that's almost unrecognizable as the original property, you don't do a lot of your own world building. So
Hmm.
you don't develop that skill. And it's really hard to do first chapters or beginning parts of actual novels when you've started with fanfic because you're like you said, the reader has to fill it in and like
Hmm.
you're used to everybody knows the players, everybody knows the chess pieces, everybody knows the setting. But when you jump to original fiction, you're the only one who does, and you've got to work on transmitting that to your readers and like building that so they understand it.
That's true. But just like anything else, you need to be careful you don't lay down too much information up front, too. You have to build it in a more subtle way so that you don't wind up giving them a lot of information up front. So, just like any other book, you don't want to, front load all your universe at them.
Yeah, and I think it's a different because I can also tell sometimes when I've edited things that I'm like, if I squint, this feels like X property fan fiction a little, just because details are left out. I
Hmm.
honestly was doing an editing job a little bit ago for someone who kind of, it was clearly sort of one of the stories was like an homage to, we'll call it an homage to
Hmm.
Rick and Morty. And like
Uh-huh.
I could tell because one of the characters was still named Rick and he was still an ordinary scientist, which is a little funny if you go down the rabbit hole because Rick and Morty is just a R-rated version of Back to the Future. It's like a
Hmm.
fanfic of a fanfic, so like a copy of
Sure.
a copy. The thing I noticed, except for one of the other characters being named Jessica and a redhead that the lead character, who's the narrator character, had a crush on. So very Rick and Morty. But is that they didn't give descriptions of anybody. Like you just expected to know like what they look like. And I think that's an artifact of fanfic too, is you forget to set up like oh, I'm used to going to Luther Mansion. I'm not going to describe what it looks like or even my version of it in fanfic. Or, oh, everybody knows that Buffy's a blonde. And then you forget to like tell people what your characters look like when you're setting up your initial chapters in an adaptation that changes it around.
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of editing required, and some of it is for the universe around them, and some of it is just for the characters themselves, and possibly rewriting their backstory a little bit so it isn't obviously from, Smallville or whatever.
Yeah, I prefer I'm bad at this because like I would say that I have a slightly easier thing to go with because I have converted things that were already AUs of the source
Hmm.
material pretty broadly. Um, very broadly. One of them is a full confession. You'll never find it. It's very old from like a decade ago, but it's a story that's like based on the idea that's a very crackfic idea of what if sometimes Clark shapeshifted into a cocker spaniel. Right there, it's real weird, and the serial numbers are half filed to begin with.
Hmm.
And then I have one I'm working on from, again, full disclosure, from Lucifer, but it's like an AU fic I'd worked on that's like 10 years in the future and everything's gone wrong and it's set in New Orleans and blah, blah, blah. And so it's just like deboning of deboning. But this is my way of saying that I do think the characters have to be reworked. Like, obviously, the reason some of your characters have the conflicts they do or have the issues they do is inherent to the source material, which you don't actually own. Um, so that's a problem.
Hmm.
Like for example, if you're doing supernatural, like what you're doing with, let's be honest, Dean most of the time is some manifestation of like depression because of the worst dad ever issues, because his dad was like this awful Marine hard ass that put all his like grief and guilt on Dean, and Dean was a parentified child to like lead all other parentified children. But if you make a fanfic into a profic from that, you're gonna have to have whatever your character is that's analogous. What the dynamic you're playing with is obviously the shadow of terrible parenting and pressure from a parent who made you grow up too fast. But you have to recontextualize that with different types of backstory and reasoning. It can't just be the exact same thing. Or again, Warner has very nice lawyers and they're going to sue you.
Exactly. When we're talking about filing off the serial numbers, we're not just talking about changing the names. We have to rebuild the backstory, rebuild everything around it, the universe, and we have to rebuild the characters. So it's actually not that easy. It's a lot of work, really.
Yeah. And I think part of the character rebuilding is also, I really think it's important to think about changing their appearance as well. I think the bigger thing is to change their backstory enough that you don't get sued. And so they're, same maybe dynamic or conflict that was interesting to you as an archetype to begin with, but it has to be changed. Like again, daddy issues, or
Mhm.
like, I don't know, Buffy's a very chosen one kind of story or whatever, but you gotta like reframe it. But
Right.
like I
These are
also don't think it's
tropes,
good to have the
but
same look. Like, you know what I mean?
yeah, you can do the tropes, but you can take the same trope and approach it differently, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
there's plenty of characters with daddy issues. You just don't want them to be identical to Dean Winchester's daddy issues.
I mean, look at the MCU. They all have daddy issues in like a million different ways. I'm sorry. It's like the club of daddy issues almost. But I think the one thing with me with an appearance is that I think that's why it grates so much in something that's sloppy about it, like 50 Shades of Grey, or
Hmm.
honestly, these three Dramione fics, because you can map them one to one. Like if I look at the cover of the Irresistible whatever falling for your enemy, the what's it called? The Irresistible Urge to Fall to Your Enemy. It's got he's in dark clothes and his hair is like silver white, and she is got brown hair that's not super mousy or like fluffy, but it's still a dark-haired white girl with brown eyes and a tall dude with like, well, he wishes, but a dude who's pale with silver, like peroxided looking, almost like white hair. You guys didn't even bother to change it,
Hmm.
or where
I
even
think,
when you have, oh yeah,
go ahead. I was just going to
oh
say,
I
I think as a writer, you also want to think of it as a different character, or you're going to keep dragging yourself back into your fanfic. It is, yes, you base this character on, say, Draco, but you want to make sure that he's a different character,
yeah, the
in every
mannerisms and
way.
things. Yeah, I've been trying that with one of the stories I've been working on bit by bit and editing and stuff, and like thinking about the thing when you say it in like role play and you like want to base a character off a like a person or actor or whatever is a face claim. So it's kind of like switching out the face claim of who would this person actually look like and
Mhm.
who would I pattern them off of instead and how would that go? Just so again, because I think if you like don't do the work to rebuild the character both their backstory, but also their physical appearance, then you're also again going to take the actor's mannerisms and choices, and you're going to make
Mhm.
that kind of embedded in how the character shows their emotions. I mean, how many times in 50 Shades of Grey does like what was her stupid name? Anastasia Steele bite her lower lip, which is just a taking of Kristen Stewart from Twilight's mannerisms and Bella-isms. So
Mhm.
it's like you gotta worry about how you weed those out because you just don't want the DNA to be super obvious.
Mhm.
Because even if no one had told me, hey, this book is a Draco and Hermione fic, I'd look at the cover and be like, huh, he looks a lot like Draco Malfoy. And I'd be like, oh, I'm right. Or when you have books that are, I mean, debate as you will, but at least it is like Midnight was saying, at least it's AU. So it's one of those ones where stuff was fantastical and they made it just human. But The
Mhm.
Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood is very famously Reylo, which is Rey and Kylo Ren fanfic from Star Wars, all those new sequel movies that eventually no one liked anyway, except the Reylos. But he's very obviously patterned on Adam Driver. And because she's a Reylo, a lot of her characters who are the male leads are very Adam Driver coded. Like I did read Deep End, and so that guy is tall and built, but he's Swedish, so he is a blonde. But most of the first ones, like in Bride and in Love Hypothesis, are real tall, dark haired, real surly, prominent, chin and nose and that kind of stuff. And you're like, this is just Adam Driver again and again as like your arc, like your somatotype, which is really weird because the movie The Love Hypothesis is going to star um Lily Reinhart from Riverdale, but it's going to also star, I don't know his actual name, but the guy who in real life is Daisy Ridley's husband. So it's not like the casting isn't aware. So that's super weird on like 8 levels, I guess. But yeah, I do think there's something to be said that you got to change the appearance so it's not because it's going to affect your characterization writing too.
I think
It's kind
so.
of like an
Back
Avi.
back in the 80s, when I used to read romance novels heavily, as historical romance novels, as I was getting into writing, there was basically every historical romance you picked up was a tall dude, muscular, black eyes, and black hair and jewel colored eyes. So I guess it doesn't bother me as much because, in a way, I feel like all romance novel heroes look like that, and I've tried to get away from that in my own writing. But there is sort of an idea in old romance that all manly men were tall with black hair and bright eyes, which kind of cracks me up.
Well, I think there's
Nowadays, I
I
think
think
also a
that
that's
wouldn't matter.
important
conversation.
to think
The
about
no
these
short
days.
kings.
I mean, these days you hear a lot of complaints about all the shadow daddies kind of looking alike. So
Mhm.
there are enough people who read often enough that they're seeing the male lead look the same across a lot of different properties. And it's not even that they were copying from something else entirely other than the trend itself. So it does benefit you a little to try to make sure that your main characters at least are distinct in some way. But I get what you're saying is that to some degree you do see similarities, even if it wasn't fan fiction, just because of genre popularity.
Yeah,
Yeah, capitalism likes to make duplicates of itself all the time. So that is fair. I guess my other sort of questions leading out of this or into other things within fanfic is then like what do people recommend? So if you have a fanfic and you're like, I really want to start filing off the serial numbers, I think I have something in the meat of the story or the dynamics that could be its own world and its own property. What is your advice? Because it could feel overwhelming to start like changing it and trying to find a way to restructure. And I like to say rebone it, but put in a new skeleton. What are your steps when you guys start trying to convert fanfic or that you think an author might want to try to help them?
that's a good question. The first thing I usually do is obviously change the names. That's easy. And then you go from there. I've changed fanfics to be like from het to mm. I've changed them to be from regular universe to supernatural. You have to just figure out what you want to do and roll with it. And sometimes it's a very big change, like when you change everything to a supernatural universe. Like you had regular characters and you go, oh, I'm going to make them wolf. I'm going to make them, wolf shifters. In that case, you have to figure out how to build your entire universe and the things that make your universe special. And you usually have to put in a new beginning. And basically, I feel like sometimes I'm just like including the love scenes and rewriting everything else.
Yeah, I've read some of the ones you've done where it's like, yeah, the love scenes are similar, but everything else really has to be rebuilt, especially when you go from like more normal scenes to now they're werewolves. It's real different.
Yeah.
I think that hard shift into a different genre is something that will push you, just kick you in the butt so that you can make all of those changes. I'm not necessarily a good person to talk to about this because I haven't actually converted any fan fiction like that. I've practiced. I mean, I've had starts, but it's so much work to do your own world building that I think the closest thing that I have is the thing that I'm working on that you know about that's based loosely on certain JRPG tropes that I've grown up with and listening to some of the music as I write it. But the characters are entirely different. It's just like a couple of little micro tropes that kind of congealed into like what if. I think as you said, you really want to hold on to there's a really important part of this story that I want to tell. And use that to help you resituate the characters and the world to help you facilitate a new story because it is such a heavy amount of recharacterizing. um, you mentioned in your class, you had the one class of doing about fan fiction, of
Yeah.
rebuilding the character's backstory and recreating the core wound and all of that. Of you have all of the steps that you otherwise would have had. You just have a little bit more of a attachment to it because you had this concept out of fan fiction.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think for me, one thing is that, and again, this is because a lot of my fanfics are such AUs of AUs, that what
Yeah.
happens is they are though, like Superman's actually sometimes a puppy. You're like, okay, that tracks or whatever. But because they are pretty AU to begin with, there's a lot of original characters that get filtered in there whom I begin to like really like and work with. So it becomes also not just that I'm okay, this is the core wound or dynamic I want to work from, but this is how my canon character in the AU has interacted with a lot of my own original characters. So it gives me a way to dive into, okay, now I'm going to give a bigger platform for the original characters to step up as I'm reshifting and figuring out how to make the canon based characters more original and more their own thing. And that helps a lot. If I don't know, like if you, for example, watch Grey's Anatomy and you wrote a Grey's Anatomy fanfic, I don't know how well you do if you tried to convert it to just a story about two doctors at a hospital, but now the hospital's in like Paris or something, or like Toronto,
If you
but it's
had
still
Grey's
the same thing.
Anatomy and it was the zombie apocalypse and also Meredith is a witch.
Yeah, that's
So
yeah.
so you keep all of the things where they have dubious relationships with their superiors, and then everything falls apart, which is not that far from how every season of Grey's Anatomy goes, because those people have lived through shootings and bomb threats and a plane crashing like twice and a ferry crashing where Meredith almost drowns. Like it's already so disaster prone, you might as well put a supernatural disaster on it and then pick your favorite characters because you can kill off as many as you want.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think that's why I have a sort of issues. I don't know, because again, I haven't read any of them. I am unclear if Rose in Chains has magical elements in it. I know for sure that the irresistible urge to fall for your enemy has a magic system in it, which is actually a little interesting because it's basically like, what if you use magic, but it was through a like a lymphatic like system in your body, which sounds weird, but it's actually kind of much more interesting than what Rowling came up with. And then
Mhm.
Alchemized obviously uses some kind of alchemy system for its magic. But like what you did is kind of it's not a one-to-one conversion because again with Alchemized, I know it has input from Handmaid's Tale, at least for some of the politics and dynamics and totalitarianism of it. But you're taking something that was a magical based like fantasy story and now it's still a magical based fantasy story. So it's still like getting a bottle of Coca-Cola, adding a little extra sugar to it, means this is my new drink, Coca-Cola. It's not exactly like that, but you're still competing in the same market. So that's a little bit different, and it's a little different than some of the fanfics we've seen before that got big. Because,
Yeah,
like I said, with 50 Shades, it went contemporary. With
Right. It's
The
totally
Love
different.
Hypothesis, it went contemporary. Bride was already making it into like werewolf fiction. This is like competing with its own kind of like, it's obviously not one to one because it's like romantasy and it's high heat, etc. But it's still in the overall fantasy market. So that's ethically interesting to me because then you're repurposing fan material and the fans are going to be interested in it, especially so because it's not the dynamic they're chasing, as it's also literally it's in a magical world again. So
Hmm.
this kind of loops me back to like ethics in this and where do you draw the line? Because I think we've been in fandoms for I've been in fandoms since I was 18, so like it's been 22 or 23 years now. But at the time, it was a secret. You didn't tell people it was Pool to Pub. You didn't let them know you'd filed serial numbers. Like if there were other fans who had liked your story, it's here now. I've taken it off other places. This is the only place you can get it. If you want to, cool. If not, also cool. Just keep supporting my fan works. I remember the first Pool to Pub fanfic I ever read once it was in its converted form was by an author back in the day in Buffy fandom who wrote Spuffy, Spike Buffy fanfic. And it was so long ago, it was like 2004. So it was like through a small press where you still had to hand email PDFs of the story. So it really predates Kindle. But that was still the thing was like, we know because we followed her progress of converting it, blah, blah, blah. And like we decided or not to like buy it. You didn't have to, no pressure, whatever. But no one wanted to talk about it. Like, and she had done the work to really restructure the world building. There's a different reason for
Hmm.
vampires and different magic systems, etc. But you just didn't tell people because A, it was considered uncouth. It was like kind of a fandom no-no to brag about it, but publicly in front of the normies. But also, he didn't want to get sued. Like we were still in an age where fanfic.net wouldn't let you do like Anne Rice or
Laura
like
K. Hamilton.
yeah, because they were like, we'll sue you. We come from the trenches in the days of like Anne Rice is like, if you touch my stuff, I'll sue you. And I hate to see that she was right in some ways. It drives me bonkers to be like the worst person you know is right about something. And in a
That's
way,
kind
on
of
some things she
funny. I
was.
didn't know Laurel K. Hamilton was like that. One of her first books was
Hmm.
a Star Trek Next Generation book.
Yeah, no, she was
Just sort
definitely
of
one of
fanfic
those.
as it happens.
Yeah. But I can't say that in the last intervening decades, especially in the last decade between the bookend of 50 Shades and now you've got Alchemized, which has a seven-figure it went to auction for a movie deal, and Legendary Pictures that did like The Dark Knight and stuff is going to be the production company for that. I can't say bookend between those two things that people like George R. R. Martin or Laurel K. Hamilton would be wrong to be like, please don't use my stuff. I mean,
Yeah, it's concerning. I will
yeah,
tell you
Is
that
it
one
there?
of the things I regret most is never writing in a big fandom. I feel
right?
like I could have gotten rich if only I picked the right fandom.
If only I'd done something real with Glee and also written a het ship, then I would be famous and rich by now.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the ethics aside, it's also really interesting that if you look at the top Harry Potter ships, Dramione is four because it's the first top heterosexual ship because
Hmm.
there's been a big boon and obviously Harry and Draco is a big one too. I don't know why people want to give Draco a love interest. I despise Draco. He didn't learn a darn thing. He never did anything. I don't
Look,
understand why he doesn't end
look,
the
look,
series
look,
in
look.
jail.
The reason that Draco is so popular is the thing that you guys were talking about before, people writing fics and people looking deeper into the character than was actually there. So because the
Exactly.
books were coming out incrementally, they were looking into, well, his father is an absolutely terrible person. What would it be like to grow up like that? And trying to give depth to the character
Hmm.
as the books were happening, and then eventually the finales came out and he's still like a baby Nazi. So with him and Snape, you had people developing the characters far more than J.K. Rowling ever intended to do herself. So he was a fan favorite for that reason, not because of what he ended up being.
Right. And also that it's
That's
an
fair.
interesting concept as to what would have happened if Harry had been friends with somebody from Slytherin and, and I guess redeemed him somewhat, but none of that happened, which again,
It's
that's
why
a
you have
That
the
it
fanfic
fanfic.
thing.
Yeah.
was that it ends
Yeah.
up being the actual enemies to lovers, and not in that. I mean, it is in Alchemist, but not in the way of like this person is an absolute creep to me and abuses me, but enemies as in we're on opposite sides and we're supposed to hate each other. There's a tension there. and we overcome it by stepping toward each other incrementally, kind of enemies to lovers. So that drives a lot of the Slytherin, Gryffindor ships, is that
Mhm.
they're meant to be on opposite sides and they have to figure out a way through it. But that's not necessarily what gets picked up.
Yeah, because yeah, and but then also there's been a boon since like COVID. I had heard in one of the reviews of Alchemized of like Marauders style AUs and things about Harry's father James and all of his friends, kind
Mars were
of.
always popular.
Yeah, it's a lot of that is very queerfic and it's very focused on those relationships. And they're also really popular. They're like 2 and 3 are Marauders pairings. I don't know which one specifically. I only read each book once. I
Remus
don't
and
really care.
Sirius is probably the top.
Yeah, but they don't get to be. I mean, I'm not saying you necessarily need to like piggyback off a fandom who all park the toxicity of her transphobic assholeness, but it's there. It makes me squick. I don't like anything that even draws attention to her or any type of thing that might make Harry Potter more
Yeah.
popular or whatever. I don't like it. It makes me angry. Tabling that, even within that fandom, the ones that they're supporting to become these big blockbuster successes are only fourth most popular, but they're the ones that are heterosexual. So there's
I was
even
going
this
to say, are
idea.
queer books not getting picked up anymore because of the change in the way the world is now?
Maybe, but like you would think that if you have 2 or 3 bigger ships within Harry Potter and 3 of them already went so gonzo, you're getting movie deals out of them that you'd want to at least think about it. But then queer ship movies don't do well because you can't cut out enough to like show them in China and make money on the box office that way.
And the
Yes.
So
big
that's probably part
publishers
of it.
have always been shady like that. Like they've always been hesitant to pick up the queer ships and then get the big book deal. Even with, let's say, Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows, like they only got the crows in there because they were doing the Shadow and Bone part. People who don't know what that is Lee Bardugo. Six of Crows is amazing, but they only got the queer part in there because she decided to like blend them so that she would be able to get the more interesting characters in there. But then it got canceled after 2 seasons because of, like, oh, well, we can't sell this, we can't keep selling this. There's trends against it. They're not willing to go to bat for those stories.
Yeah. So I mean, and you would also say that the author of Alchemized, Sinyan Liu, I think that's their name, they're in being queer, but still the book that gets sort of famous in that pile is very much a het focused fic. And again, I don't know how they square being an NB writing in a sandbox with the world's most transphobic person, except for Elon Musk. I don't know. That's their own struggle to figure out.
Well,
It doesn't miss me that when you make it big in fanfic, it's always the het ships. Like if that weren't true, then there's so much MCU fanfic that would have like pole vaulted to the top of all
right.
these original charts.
It would
Yeah, I
be a
mean we all
Stephen Bucky
know
like
it was
everywhere.
Stephen Bucky universe all over the place, literally. So it
But you
doesn't
hope
miss
that
me.
the author of Alchemized is able to keep this going. I mean, the thing that was annoying with 50 Shades of Grey and some of the other ones that jump forward is that they don't have anything else to say, really. So if the person who created Alchemized has enough wherewithal to develop a magic system, even if it is based on anime, I like
It
some of
wouldn't
the
be
anime
hard to
magic. Shut up.
be better.
And so if they have that much creativity, maybe after this one comes out, they can continue to put things out that are not based off of JK Evil, develop from that. But it's very hard for people who are queer or non-binary or trans to even get picked up. So the politics of getting published are so yucky to begin with that you can't necessarily say that you can use your fan fiction to make it big.
Yeah, and I can't say what people would do, what people should do. I know what my personal limits are. Anything that even comes near Harry Potter, I'm just like over it as an NB. I can't deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. I think Rowling's gross. But it still leads to the bigger question of like the way these 3 books were marketed. There was like a book box company that sends you samples or books of the month, and it's called Edelweiss, and they made a whole flyer about, well, have you seen, Rose in Chains? It's really Dramione. It's really based on this. Look at how popular this is. That people publishing fanfics. Isn't this cool? And it became part of the marketing when they interviewed people about Alchemized, but also about the irresistible urge to fall for your enemy, etc. All the marketing was like, this started as a Harry Potter fanfic. This was Harry Potter fanfic. Did you know this was a Harry Potter fanfic? And so would people have been as curious to read it if they hadn't seen the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc., op-ed explaining how this really started as from the Harry Potter universe? Like, if it isn't important to the story as it stands now, then why does it have to be repeated as the through line in all of the marketing? If it was mentioned offhand once or twice, it'd be one thing, but it became the
Hmm.
drumbeat for these three books at once to be we're repurposing the fanfic. So it's drawing that base so that way you have a guaranteed IP and audience to make it a success.
Right. In a way, this happened with 50 Shades, because I don't know how many people remember, but back then Amazon had boards you could hang out on, and her fans all flooded the boards telling everybody to read Shades of Grey, and it just kept, you could not move on
It was
Amazon
like
without seeing
botting,
it
yeah.
mentioned. But it was more like an underground thing. This is like more overt and from the publisher itself. So,
Yeah, because if you're getting the op-ed piece in like the Washington Post, then someone from the publishing house said, we really want to market it this way. Let's make it happen. This is what you need to emphasize when you're talking to the press. So it's a directive from the publishing house that we're going to market this as fan fiction. We're going to let you know all the time, wall to wall. So you're curious enough about, oh, this is converted HP fic. How did this get to be, Draco and Hermione? That's part of their whole pitch for the book. And
mhm.
that's really different.
And
It's
as you said, like the publishing houses and the agents also just literally asking for fanfic of X popular property.
Yeah, I've seen calls that say, you said it maybe last year, it was like they wanted books that are like Elphaba and Glinda vibes for sapphic stuff. Or like, I cannot tell you, I've seen at least 4 agents since July on MSWL, which is hashtag MSWL, is if you want to look for agents and what they're looking for right now is a great way to find that. It's just a tip. But I've seen at least 4 agents say, I really want something like K-pop Demon Hunters. I want something like K-pop Demon Hunters in a book. And like I get it. And K-pop Demon Hunters you could probably have more leeway on because it draws from a lot of South Korean folklore. So if you're a South Korean writer or artist and that's your lore and what you've grown up as your mythology from your family, and there's a lot of things to pick and choose from, like saying I really like Celtic vibes because they draw so many things from Korean folklore. It's kind of like doing stuff with Lucifer is a little easier because you can't copyright the Bible, I guess,
mhm.
is the way to put that.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, you can always pivot into a different angle of demonology.
yeah, exactly. But I guess my point was, it's just you're seeing agents directly call for it now. Like 20 years ago, we didn't talk to anybody about it. Then 50 Shades came out, and it was like, okay, we get it. This one book was popular. People probably behind the scenes were raiding the bookshelves for, did you write a fanfic? The Writer's Coffee Shop was converting things like Beautiful Disaster by Jamie McGuire, who started out also as a Bella Edward shipper. But it
Uh-huh.
was like the general public didn't super know, except for 50 Shades, which became a joke and not a
Right.
selling point. Oh, Snow Queen's Ice Dragon wrote this, har har. But then somewhere around where the Raylos started to get big with Allie Hazelwood and Jennifer something, I can't remember, it was like Levin or something, who wrote My Roommate is a Vampire. That book I read was just started out as like AU all human, well, not all human, but Adam Driver is not a Sith Lord this time. He's a vampire, but it still physically looks the same.
It's a fruit
Kind
bat.
of stuff. It's amazingly weird. It's not a good book, but I love the ending. I'm like, well, he can just make kumquats when he's nervous. That's not hyperbole, Ellie. That's what his vampire power is. It is bizarre. But that somewhere around that edge when the Raylos really started breaking out in 2018, 2019, it became like not a dirty secret. It became, what do you got for me? Oh, do you have this
Not even an
dynamic?
open secret. Yeah.
But now after 2025 with Dramione using it as the marketing push in like the papers of record, whether I agree with them currently now or not, because they're both trash right now. But that's different. It's the secret's out. Not only that, but we're literally marketing on it. Like eventually I get worried because I think Rowling probably doesn't want to sue because anything that gives her any type of good press when she's made a complete ass of herself being essentially a Nazi, which is ironic. But like, I guess she kind of lets it slide. But eventually, you're gonna pull like. There's no reason Margaret Atwood couldn't be like, "Hey, you stole like the look of the character, even on the cover of Alchemy. She's in a red dress. Like, you stole the idea of some of these things, which are still also historical precedents of how you abuse women, blah blah blah." But like, eventually, somebody's gonna pull this trick. Some publishing house, even if it's Penguin Random House, it's gonna be like, "Oh, this is a great book. Didn't you know it was based on Batman fan fiction, or is based on Little Mermaid fan fiction, or is based
Mm-hmm.
on whatever big
It'd be
multimedia
hilarious.
company
Gregory
will
Maguire tried to sue.
yeah, will sue the ever-loving crap out of you. Or like, I don't know, this is Back to the Future fan fiction. We're gonna sue the ever-loving crap out of you. I'm thinking about big movie studios and Universal, Warner, and Disney, because no one wants to really screw with Disney, were the first three that came to mind. But like eventually someone's gonna pull this stunt with something that Disney really is gonna sue, and then no one can do fanfic again. Like that's what's
Well,
gonna happen.
I
It'll be back
think
to
we're
underground.
already in a dangerous spot because of the current administration, and the people running the administration are anti what they think of as porn. And they're
Which
very likely to come after things like Archive of Our Own eventually. So already I feel like we're in a precarious situation, and deliberately printing fanfic as thinly disguised original novels is
that are
dangerous.
high heat, by the way.
Yeah.
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 It's
I mean,
frustrating. It's because I
especially
don't
if
want
you
it to
write
ruin it
queer
for
stuff
everybody
like we do.
else.
The queer stuff is probably the first to get hit.
Yeah, because then they always define just existing as a queer person in a queer space as porn.
Yeah.
So it becomes a cudgel and a slippery slope for everything else. But
Yes.
that is definitely the story for another day about how it's always queer's porn first, even if it's not.
Yeah.
So I guess we're wrapping up because if it's too long, I can't edit and then I cry myself to sleep over the script. But what are any last tips or thoughts you have for people who want to start out and converting their fanfics? And what are any tips you have in people who just are interested in writing but have never even started or dipped their toe into fanfic before? What are you want to leave the listeners with, guys?
Well, fanfic is fun. That's why people write it. And, almost everybody sees a show and has other ideas about how it could have worked out, the little things that weren't covered, the way the characterization was wrong. And that's a good way to start on fanfic, just thinking about, wow, I would have written that differently. But
Yeah,
then
that's
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say of like fanfic is fun. And I have a student who came back to my class after a couple of years and her writing's improved a lot because she has a better sense of audience now. And so the only thing she's been doing is writing fanfic. Like literally that's the only writing
Mhm.
she's been doing. So as you're saying, it's fun. You get involved in it. It gives
Huh?
you time to develop.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you learn to write by writing. I think a lot of people don't understand this. The more you write, generally, the better a writer you're going to be. And if it's fanfic, that's okay. Fanfic is
Yeah.
fine. It's a good way to learn to write.
Yeah, you get out your first million or 3 million words I've wasted in my life.
I remember
And I
I
think
wrote 2 million words in 2 years once.
yeah, it does make you
Most,
really uh sometimes teaches you speed too, because like you're so excited to get it out, which is something that when
mm-hmm,
I parlayed into ghostwriting helped a lot. It was like I knew I could make deadline because I practiced writing huge volumes
right.
of words so much, so frequently. Wish I could do that now. I guess that's different stresses of different schools and things. But
Yeah.
I guess my takeaway with fanfic is like, A, I don't want people to look down on it because I think we've established how it practices voice, it practices style. It gives you a chance to learn how to really write dialogue and just want to practice
Mm-hmm.
and get that community and even try those new skills. So I don't think people should look down on it. I do want to stress that when you think about going pro, A, ethically, where I think you need to take the dynamics or the main character wound or archetype that you were interested in and then recontextualize it from the ground up. Like I
I
said, if
love
you
that core wound idea, by the way.
yeah, like if you
I
want to
haven't heard it phrased that way, but I like that idea that you have to like change that a little bit.
yeah, like if you want to write daddy issues with Dean Winchester, you can't write Dean Winchester, but there are like 100 different ways to have daddy issues because most people do. So
Yes.
think about how you'll recontextualize that. But my other thing is remembering that it's a different medium. And that I think a lot of the things you see when people think of bad fanfic turned profic, I'm looking at you, 50 Shades especially, are the things that hang over. And I mean, not even like characterization, but I mean serialization where things aren't tightened up and where you don't realize you have less space in a novel. Also, a serialization where you feel like you reminded me of something that just happened where I'm sitting here reading my book 2 chapters ago, but obviously is an artifice of fanfic that's being serial because you might have put an update 3 weeks later, but you want to remind them of something that happened 3 weeks before. But you see that
Mm-hmm.
a lot in things like 50 Shades where it wasn't edited enough. You're, I don't have amnesia. Why are we repeating this?
Yes,
So,
exactly.
and then,
You have to edit stuff like that out and not be repetitive.
and I don't liken it to one's better or worse than the other. I liken it to a movie script is not the same thing written out as a book is not the same thing written out as a fanfic. It's not the same thing written out
Mhm.
as, I don't even know, a graphic novel.
Right.
They're all different mediums.
TVs
They're
and
writing for
movie
different
shows. TV shows and
consideration.
movies aren't the same. They're different. It's a different art
Yeah.
form, basically.
So just, yeah, you even if you pulled it and you changed the characterization enough and the world building enough and leaned into more original characters, if you're still keeping it that serialized format that runs for 180,000 words, it's still not a novel yet. You'll have to do some like actual content cutting to tighten the plot because
Hmm.
you can't explore interstitials in the same way in a novel, honestly, because even if you're self-publishing, it's a business. You can only make it so big. And if you even want to have a print option or have it in a form people are used to reading when they read a novel, it
Hmm.
has to have a certain tightness to it of, depending on the genre, 80 to 120 or
Yeah.
130,000 words.
Or
Just
you can do a
has to fit.
duology, which everybody claims
Yes.
to hate, but which somehow seem to sell okay anyway.
Yes. Alchemized is
That's because
duology,
some
or not
people are
Alchemized,
really tired of reading
irresistible
five-book
duology.
series.
Yeah. It's better to do that than here's my 200,000 word behemoth. Will you publish it for me?
Yes, true.
But anyway, ladies, thank you so much for talking with us today, Jim and I. Midnight and I will be back in a couple weeks. We started our seasonal rewatch of many a terrible and some good. We found a really great one, Christmas movies. So our next couple things we'll be talking more about 'tis the season. But have a good week for everyone. We'll see you in a couple. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you for joining the Otherlands Editing Podcast. Look for our next episode coming soon. And in the interim, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you want more information or want to connect, you can find Margaret Bates and Midnight Voss at our site, Otherlands Editing. Until next time, keep writing and keep refining your words.